Success isn't just about strategy, it's about trust. At Bose Public Affairs Group, we put clients first with responsiveness, integrity, and a focus on results. Our team includes former policymakers and government leaders who anticipate issues, navigate challenges, and build winning strategies. From the halls of Congress to the state capitol to City Hall, we understand great outcomes start with listening. Bose Public Affairs Group. Bose means business.
This week on Crossroads Politics, doing away with DEI. The governor's decision this week with support from the Attorney General.
We'll win this one. It's easy.
They take on the state's more than 40-year-old program to help women and minority-owned businesses work for the state. Meanwhile, as the governor touts Indiana's budget, regulators take aim at the high cost of electricity, their recommendations for lawmakers, and the investigations they're launching. As summer break draws towards a close, could Indiana schools make a change?
I've never been worried that somehow they're missing out on some sort of education that they would get with 5 days.
New guidance for a 4-day school week. This week, the lieutenant governor called for a ban on broadcasts of the Muslim call to worship. So we went to Indiana's largest mosque to look deeper. Plus, the president in primetime, a speech to the nation on election integrity, why his message on the polls is getting political pushback. Hello and welcome to Crossroads Politics here on WTHR. I'm Emily Longnecker. We start with a huge shakeup to a decades-old program meant to help minority and women-owned businesses win state contracts. Indiana's Attorney General says it's unconstitutional. Governor Braun agrees, and so this week he announced it's over. When it comes to which businesses Indiana should award contracts to, Governor Mike Braun announced Wednesday race and sex will no longer be considered.
We're just doing what constitutionally, what the Supreme Court said we needed to do.
The governor's referring to a 2023 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court that said race could no longer be a factor in college admissions. Because of that, Indiana's Attorney General says a law put in place in the early 80s dealing with state contracts is unconstitutional. Under the law, Indiana is required to award a certain percentage of its state contracts to minority and women-owned businesses. When it was put in place, lawmakers said studies showed disparities in the number of state contracts that those businesses were receiving. That's not how Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita sees it.
The government put its thumb on the scale against any business not owned by someone in the state's favored racial or gender categories. This wasn't just special treatment, it was discrimination.
That's part of the legal opinion Rokita gave Governor Braun, advising him this law didn't need to be enforced because he believes it's unconstitutional. Both the Attorney General and the governor acknowledged there were no complaints from businesses that felt they'd been discriminated against because of the law.
The first thing that I said was, welcome to the Indianapolis for Indiana Black Expo. It's the governor's gift to you to say you don't matter.
Democratic lawmakers reacted to the governor's announcement, questioning his decision to stop enforcing a law they say established goals to make sure minority and women-owned businesses had a fair shot.
If you believe there was no racism in the 80s and that it's gone completely now, although it never was, you're in fantasy land.
Wednesday's announcement comes as Governor Braun continues to reshape state policy around DEI, arguing opportunity should be based on merit, excellence, and innovation, or MEI, rather than race or gender. It also comes a day after the governor joined the Indiana Black Expo to celebrate Black and minority-owned businesses as part of its summer celebration. The president and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League called the governor's decision a crossroads and challenged Braun to define what he means by MEI.
What is the definition? What are the terms? What are the quantifiable measures of what that means for businesses as we move forward?
As for what comes next, the governor says current contracts will be honored. As for legal challenges that could arise because of the change, the Attorney General isn't worried.
We'll win this one. It's easy.
Indiana Democrats are also responding to the governor's decision. State Senator Shelley Yoder says in the governor's hands, quote, merit is a euphemism for preserving the status quo, closing doors on entrepreneurs who have historically been excluded while protecting access for people already connected to power. That is not a level playing field. it is a double standard, end quote. Joining us now is Niki Kelly, editor of the Capitol Chronicle. Niki, thanks for always being here. The Attorney General said this week that he had approached Republican leadership last session, telling them that this law was unconstitutional, that something needed to be changed. He says they told him, look, we don't have an appetite for this. So in light of that, he believes the governor is justified in these actions. Does he make a point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real legal question here is, I don't know if it's unconstitutional, and obviously Todd Rokita and his staff are attorneys, but these are non-binding opinions. And so there is a question about whether, you know, the top leaders of the state can just ignore a law because they believe it's unconstitutional. It's, you know, on the books, and so someone could challenge, and then it would be up to a judge to actually find it unconstitutional. So it'll be interesting to see if lawmakers do move to repeal it now that there's this, you know, large volume of, you know, proof, according to Attorney General Rokita.
I mean, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Can the governor just repeal a law if he thinks it's unconstitutional and there's this opinion?
No, he cannot. Obviously, he's going to choose not to enforce it and halt the program. And like I said, someone could challenge that because it is a legal law on the books, and this is an opinion. This is not a ruling or a finding.
Do you expect there to be challenges?
I don't know. I mean, I do think that the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, decision from a couple of years ago is definitely leans away from this, so it would be a hard case.
If in some world, if a Democrat took office, could they bring back these standards? Could you bring this back, or you'd have to get the legislature involved?
Oh, absolutely, you could if the law is still there, which it currently is.
Okay. All right, we're going to get back to you in a second. A Muslim advocacy group tells us it's keeping a close eye on the State House to see if any legislation is filed targeting the Muslim community. It comes after multiple controversial comments from Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith, the latest saying mosques should be banned from playing the call to prayer over a loudspeaker. Jenna Webster went to a mosque in Fishers this week where they say, to their knowledge, no mosques in Indiana are doing that.
It's a moment woven into the day, a moment to connect with God. The daily call to prayer done together, done with purpose and devotion.
For me, it's really therapeutic. It's an opportunity to kind of step away from the stresses of daily life.
Words spoken in Arabic are about worshiping one true God. Words Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith calls words of death and destruction.
If you're a mosque and you want to have a loudspeaker and you want to start, pumping these out 5 times a day locally, the state can say, you're not going to do that, right? We're not allowing that.
That was Beckwith's thoughts on a conservative podcast a few weeks ago. They follow earlier controversial statements saying he hates the religion, calling it a demonic death cult. But step outside the Al Huda Foundation, and the mosque's neighbors won't hear this moment of prayer.
When you hear the adhan, it's happening inside the building to let the folks here know that it's time to go pray.
Beckwith's office declined our interview request, but did send us a statement saying in part, quote, Lieutenant Governor Beckwith will always stand up for American values and refuses to apologize for saying Sharia law has no place in this country and that America is now and always should be one nation under God. We did respond and ask if he knew any mosques in Indiana that were using a loudspeaker for the call to prayer, and he did not respond.
It's just simply factually inaccurate to say, we're sick and tired of you guys disturbing your neighbors with your call to prayer when we've been here for a very long time and nobody does the call to prayer outside out loud. It literally doesn't happen.
Imam Nasser Karimian leads the mosque in Fishers, the largest in the state. He doesn't know of any mosques that broadcast the call to prayer publicly either.
Do you feel angry? I feel angry too. Let's be angry together. That's really what it represents. So it's hard for me to really feel like this has anything to do with Islam.
To see an elected official really coming out with just blatant lies and saying that, the call to prayer is a call to death and destruction is just shocking. I'm a father of 4, and so it makes me, scared for my wife and kids.
Karimian says statements like this are nothing new. His message to his community, life is a test. And the door to this mosque is always open. In Fishers, Jenna Webster, 13 News.
The Indiana Muslim Advocacy Network doesn't know if legislation banning loudspeakers is the goal. Niki, bringing you back in, do you expect something like that to happen?
You know, I don't know. It would be a very difficult law to write and be constitutional because you can't target one religion over another. That's clearly, you know, unconstitutional. And so, you know, then if you do have to ban use of loudspeakers, does that affect a high school football game, which I used to be able to hear from my backyard, you know? You know, you would have to think about it practically, and that would be a very difficult law to write.
The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that the Catholic Church, their bells are protected under the First Amendment. So a ruling like that, would you expect that to give lawmakers pause? They're going to look at that, right?
Absolutely. And I saw a lot of people comparing it to the, you know, church bells as well. And so, and it's funny, your report was interesting because I didn't even realize that many of the mosques in Indiana don't even do that. So I think this is one of those things where sometimes politicians use some sort of national, you know, hot topic to get attention and get your social media, you know, pats on the back, but it isn't actually happening here, and it would be very hard to actually put into law what he's saying.
So during the podcast where Beckwith made these comments, he said that he believes he and Governor Braun see eye to eye and that he and other state leaders, quote, recognize the threat of radical Islam. He says Braun just doesn't use the same language that he does. On Wednesday, Braun said he won't, quote, make an opinion on Beckwith's statements, but said how you say it makes a difference.
I think in that case, I'm a believer in the religious freedom, and the Constitution's quite clear on what makes sense there. And we're a country of free speech. If you're espousing something, though, that does have parts of it, that needs to be litigated in the public discourse. Just be careful how you do it.
Braun also said he's been clear that state leaders should, quote, be careful with what you say. Niki, this is certainly not the first time the governor has been asked about something that the lieutenant governor has said. And it's not the first time that his answer has been basically you need to be more careful about the way you say things.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a broken record at this point.
Right?
That's his general response. He doesn't directly call Micah Beckwith out, which I think frustrates some people, but he also doesn't, you know, fully, you know, I guess, accept it. And so he's trying to toe this line and not be associated with it.
Is this just a distraction for the Braun administration, or is this a bigger problem? Has he gotten used to this?
I think they're used to it by now. I mean, this started from the minute he was nominated as lieutenant governor, and we've repeatedly gone to the governor to ask, oh, your lieutenant governor said this. And so I think at this point they're used to having to respond to sort of wild things that Micah says.
I mean, I was going to say he certainly seems prepared to take those questions when they are asked, and they are asked.
Well, and it's not hard to be prepared when your answer every time is he needs to be more careful with the words he uses. So he's saying he sort of agrees with him, but he's not, you know, he's not saying it the proper way.
He doesn't come right out, though, and say he agrees with him.
Correct. Sort of, like right on the line. He's definitely toeing it.
Speaks around it.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Niki. Let's move on to one of Indiana's highest profile races this year, the race to be the next Secretary of State. Now, we've got some numbers giving us an idea of who's winning the money race right now. The latest fundraising reports are out, offering a snapshot of each campaign's finances.
If money talks, here's what the latest fundraising numbers say when it comes to the race to be Indiana's next Secretary of State. The second quarter fundraising reports are out. They show how much money each campaign raised, spent, and the cash they have on hand from April 1st through the end of June. When it comes to which campaign raised the most money during that time period, independent Greg Ballard's campaign raised the most, with over $670,000. Followed by Democratic candidate Bo Bai. His campaign raised just over $513,000. Republican Max Engling's campaign was next with just over $200,000, followed by Libertarian Lori Schilling's campaign that raised just over $10,000 in the second quarter. But this is about more than one quarter. When it comes to which candidate has the most money on hand, those numbers stack up differently. Bai leads in that regard with over $2 million. Engling is next with over $150,000, followed by Ballard with close to $26,500 left. Schilling's again in the fourth spot with close to $8,000. Each campaign sent a statement about the latest numbers. Schilling's statement said in part, quote, "Our campaign is the only one funded by the people of Indiana. We aren't getting propped up by PACs or receiving large amounts of dark money. This campaign relies on everyday Hoosiers because they are the people Lori is running to serve." Bay's campaign touted his lead for the candidate with the most cash on hand. His statement read in part, quote, "I'm grateful for the outpouring of support we've received, support that comes from all 92 counties, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike." In his statement, Engling said he was honored by the support his campaign received since launching in late May. Engling said, quote, "We are focused on issues important to Hoosiers, and we look forward to continuing to raise funds as we push back against the Democrats' attempts to undo common-sense election integrity laws." In their statement about fundraising numbers, Ballard's campaign said it had raised the most money per month, going on to say, quote, "We're also proud to say that 99% of the dollars that we've raised to date have come from Hoosiers who know our state needs more good candidates like Greg Ballard running for office." And while the fundraising race is far from over, neither is the race for the office itself, with less than 4 months to go until Election Day.
So, Niki, finances aren't a perfect solution when we don't have polling, but what do these numbers tell you about the state of the race right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think nothing was the biggest surprise to me was that Greg Ballard, he obviously raised a lot of money, which I expected as a former Republican with a lot of friends and connections who can do that. I was surprised that he basically spent it all just trying to get on the ballot. So he's essentially starting from ground zero again. Bose continues to have strong fundraising. Max Engling has only been in the race a couple months, and so I think he had a good start, and you will definitely see that pick up. Republicans are, intent on keeping that seat, so I expect that he will have no problem raising money either.
You think we'll see any significant changes over the next month as far as fundraising or, how people fundraise or the messages getting out?
Yeah, no, right now this is the time where they have to buckle down to get fundraising and do as many events as possible. I would expect that we are going to see them on TV closer to the election, but right now they've got to spend time raising the money.
Yeah, okay. We're going to check back with you in a little bit here. Indiana is just ended its fiscal year with an almost $2 billion surplus, and the surplus is expected to continue next year. The state budget agency estimates Indiana will add another $1.3 billion to the state's cash reserves next year. That's a bit of a surprise. In 2025, the state was expecting tax revenue to grow by less than 1%. Instead, it came in at almost 7%.
What this amounts to is that we now have options. So when it comes to things that we need to do better, the high cost of health care in this state, one of the highest in the country with some of the poorest outcomes. We all struggle with that. That's part of affordability.
Democrats agree that the funding should help with health care costs. Indianapolis Representative Ed Delaney wrote, quote, "The public doesn't feel the benefits of an extra $1.1 billion in our coffers when over 18,000 Hoosiers sit on Medicaid wait lists or see their Affordable Care Act premiums rise or learn hundreds of child care centers have closed because of the cuts." So, Niki, a pleasant surprise after that dismal budget forecast in 2025. You remember those days. How will this impact next year's budget bill?
Yeah, I think it actually kind of makes it harder for them because, they're going to have to decide what to do with all this money. They can't let it all sit there. That's just simply not a conservative thing to do, to have $4 billion sitting there. I think we're at our current reserves are at 23% of annual spending, and the goal is usually 10 to 15%. So they've got too much money on hand, and they're going to have to figure out where to direct that, whether it's child care vouchers or, back up the Medicaid and the SNAP program. So yeah, and then they'll get some people who see all that money and want them to cut taxes. So it kind of puts them in a little bit of a hard position going into the next budget cycle.
What about schools and local governments. We hear them discussing how much, of a strain that they've been under since the property tax reform. Is there a chance that some of this surplus could go to alleviate that?
No. Property taxes fund local government. They're not going to start mixing state dollars in that any more than just the basic tuition support, which obviously goes to pay teachers. So, and that's always a big part of the budget. About 50% is what we spend on education, and that will continue to be so.
Do you think local governments are looking at kind of the celebration and the governor touting this surplus and saying, do you think they're kind of scratching their heads?
Probably a little bit, although this surplus is going to make it so that they get made whole for the gas tax suspension that took road dollars away, so that's helpful for them.
Okay, all right, sit tight. We'll be back with you in a bit. The conflict with Iran is back to daily strikes on both sides. We'll take you inside the calculus driving the fighting that has shattered a fragile peace.
We've received great feedback, not just from staff, but from parents and the kids.
Changing to a shorter school week, why new guidance on 4-day school weeks from the state could jeopardize the only school currently using it being able to continue.
We spent the money on it, and now just 2 years later, we're doing away with them. That to me seems like a waste.
A $440,000 waste, the fight over how the state sets its speed limit and what it costs. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Indiana spent nearly $500,000 to buy variable speed limit signs. They were first installed in 2024. Now it's 2 years later and the signs are blank. 13 Investigates reporter Sierra Putman learned these signs are now outlawed, and now some are wondering if they were just a big waste of your tax dollars. If you drive around I-465, you'll see the signs are no longer in use, all because of a new law that took effect July 1st.
Driving along this part of Interstate 465, the speed limit is 65 miles per hour. Clear as day on these standard white signs, but these variable speed limit signs are now covered in black. This contract shows the state bought 62 of them for more than $440,000. A new law now prohibits the Indiana Department of Transportation from using them. Will Coulteryan made this post on Facebook.
We spent the money on it, and now just 2 years later, we're doing away with them. That to me seems like a waste.
He's running as a Democrat for the District 40 state representative seat. His opponent, the incumbent Republican, co-authored the law, but Senator Aaron Freeman added the section banning the signs. NDOT maintains they improve safety by allowing it to slow traffic based on traffic and weather needs. Here's some of the debate from the Senate floor.
So let's keep every tool in the tool belt for our hardworking men and women of NDOT. Please defeat this amendment. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You just heard the difference between the Republican and the Democratic Party right there. I am firmly of the belief that you as a driver can figure out when you need to slow down. I am firmly of the belief that I don't need NDOT to put a sign up to tell me to slow down when traffic is stopped in front of me. I believe Hoosiers are smarter than that.
Hundreds of people responded to Coulteryan's post about the signs. Critics called the signs unnecessary, confusing, and even a potential speed trap. But both sides agreed on one thing: leaving them unused is a waste of taxpayer money. 13 Investigates learned the law's impact went further. A May 27th memo from NDOT's Chief Engineer of Construction says the agency will discontinue piloting the use of electronic speed limit signs in work zones, directing employees to remove and replace signs already installed. Warning: do not simply continue to use the sign in a non-variable speed manner. However, an NDOT spokesperson told 13 Investigates it currently believes the variable speed limit signs are still allowed in work zones, seeming to contradict the May memo.
We have an administration that is consistently telling us to do more with less. I think it's very important that we use resources we already have.
Despite costing taxpayers $7,200 apiece, these resources will go unused. It's the law.
And that was 13 Investigates reporter Sierra Putman reporting she reached out to lawmakers who backed the bill and who added the language prohibiting the signs. They did not provide comment in time for our deadline. INDOT told Sierra that if plans to leave the signs in place for now, ready to be used if they are allowed in the future, but they don't have any plans to repurpose or even sell them at this point. Nikki, why ban the signs?
Well, I think this is just a typical case of the executive branch moving forward with a new idea and not getting lawmakers on board beforehand. And obviously, once lawmakers saw them in action, they were like, no, we don't like those. And so I just think, even though they're both run by Republicans back in 2024 when it happened, there certainly was a lack of communication.
I was going to say, didn't anybody talk to each other, a text, a call?
No, I mean, I would say, the law is in there. I mean, I would hope they'd be able to sell them. I mean, maybe some other state would like them. They look lovely.
I mean, I guess we're just going to see what happens. For now, they're there, and we'll see how it's handled.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We've got some more questions on some other things. This week, we also heard from the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission outlining 16 steps it says will help to cut down on the cost of electricity in Indiana. The commission wants to make it easier to understand what you're actually paying and to ultimately make those bills more affordable. And that starts with 2 investigations now underway from the IURC. The first looks at return on equity, or how much profit the electric companies are pulling in from our bills. The second is investigating trackers used by all utility companies to adjust rates as needed. We're paying for those trackers, whether they're outlined in our bills or not. The commission wants the utility companies to see if all those trackers are needed, and if not, look at how to shut them down. This was a 10-page report released on Wednesday. In it, the IURC also called on Indiana utilities to, quote, step up. They're calling for things like improving customer care, even doubling the money allocated to customer assistance programs. You can read the entire report right now on WTHR.com. The plan is to wrap up those 2 investigations by the end of the year and make a plan going forward. This all came after the IURC held listening tours in 10 different cities. They got thousands of comments, all of them about affordability. The biggest complaints from customers are higher bills and confusing bills. Customers asking, what are we actually paying for? The chairman of the commission says we can expect to see some changes in the coming months. The Citizens Action Coalition, a consumer advocacy group, praised the investigation into the tracking mechanisms utilities use. They sent a statement from their executive director, Kerwin Olson, saying in part, we have long been critical of tracking mechanisms which allow monopolies to increase bills outside of a rate case and which reduce the discretion and flexibility of regulators. The IURC also had 3 suggestions for the General Assembly. They want lawmakers to evaluate the sales tax on utility bills. They want oversight of who owns utilities and mandatory participation in regional transmission organizations. Those are groups of utilities that buy and sell electricity to help deal with shortages and spikes in demand. Nikki, how ready are lawmakers to look at this?
I hope they are. I think the report is really well done. The tracker issue specifically, I think, is important for lawmakers to know. I think they have approved these outside sort of fees over the last 10, 20 years and don't really understand the cumulative impact that they're having now. I kind of compare it to when you buy a flight, you buy your airline ticket and then you get a fee for everything, to pick your seat, to take luggage on. So, you're paying one and then they've got these additional costs on the side. And I think that part especially will be very interesting.
All of this is really just quite a lesson in how utilities work for regular folks who might just, they get their bill and they say, why is my bill going up? What is this? I have so many questions. Another issue people are really interested in is that AES rate hike that was recently approved. The governor and consumer advocates have called on the IURC to reconsider that hike. This week, the IURC's chairman, Anthony Swinger, addressed those calls. Take a listen.
A motion was filed. The utilities will have a response to respond in writing to those legal arguments. The petitioning parties will have the opportunity to reply to that, and the commission has 60 days to act. It could either approve the motion, deny the motion, or reopen the record.
So when that time comes, what do you see the IURC doing?
If I knew that, I'd get in. Maybe we could put it on Kalshi, right? And do some bets. I don't know. In essence, it's going to be 4 of the same 5 members. So it's like when you ask a judge to reconsider their own ruling. They're usually not going to do that. So we are going to possibly have a new member by then, and so maybe that would shift just a little bit. But I would probably lean against seeing them reopen it, but we'll see.
And we have, and Mr. Swinger, of course, Chairman Swinger will recuse himself, right? He recused himself the last time, so we expect
which
that.
kind of puts us, if the 2 people who voted for it remain, and then maybe the one against, and maybe a new one against, then that would put us at 2-2. So it's an interesting discussion, but I'm not sure we're going to see a new look at that.
People are really watching this closely.
Yeah, it's like the test case, basically, for this new IURC and what the governor wants.
Okay, we'll see. More Indiana schools could be asking the state for permission to move to a 4-day week. A new law sets requirements that districts must meet before that can happen. One elementary school has already been operating on that schedule for 2 years. This week I found out what's working for them and whether the school itself will qualify under the new law.
And I know it's not for everybody.
But when it comes to what works for his family of 5, Chad Musser says a 4-day school week has worked out great for his sons attending Vinton Elementary in Lafayette.
I've never been worried that somehow they're missing out on some sort of education that they would get with 5 days.
Musser's youngest is going to be in kindergarten this year. He hopes the same schedule can continue.
I know not everybody is able to do that, but for us, having Fridays where just as a family, we can be together. We can have intentional time with our kids, just as a father, as a Christian. I think that's huge.
We've received great feedback, not just from staff, but from parents and the kids.
Cindy Preston's the principal at Vinton Elementary. This year will be the 3rd in a 3-year pilot program, trying out the 4-day school week. Vinton's the only school in the state trying out the new schedule.
We would really love to continue it if the state allows us to do that.
A new state law creates new requirements and guardrails for that to happen. Schools wanting to move to a 4-day week can apply through Indiana's Department of Education, but have to meet these 4 requirements first. Offer transportation to students who still want to attend a school with a 5-day week. Meet or exceed a $45,000 minimum starting teacher salary. Offer free enrichment classes and help to students on the 5th day when regular classes aren't going on. And finally, any school wanting to go to a 4-day school week must earn an A letter grade under Indiana's new accountability model that measures school performance. Part of that includes student scores on iLearn and iRead tests, but also measures student growth and attendance.
In the past, we would not meet it.
Principal Preston isn't sure what grade Vinton will receive. She says attendance and reading scores are up under the new schedule, while discipline incidents have gone down. That's not the only change, according to Preston.
The number one thing we've seen is an improvement, in our staff mental health and our kids. Come Monday morning, they are ready.
For Chad Musser,
I just don't have enough good things to say about it.
This dad hopes the state will see it the same way.
The Indiana Department of Education sent us a statement about the new requirements. It said in part, quote, in addition to the criteria outlined in HEA 1266, the Indiana Department of Education will prioritize requests that clearly center on students' needs and include thoughtful engagement with families and school staff about the potential impacts. Nikki, is this something that you think that lawmakers are hoping more schools would consider to cut costs?
I got to be honest. This is growing much faster in other parts of the state. I did a story, and I think they have hundreds of schools doing this in Texas. And so when I looked at the 4 guidelines that the lawmakers put in place, it almost seemed to me like they kind of didn't want people to do it, because those are 4 very hard things to meet.
Yes.
And especially the transportation, if there's no nearby school, if you're in a smaller district that only has 1 elementary, are you going to drive the kid to a different district? I mean, that gets complicated. And then also the issue about providing enrichment or remediation for free on the off day, that sort of cuts into the savings, right? And so I'm not sure if lawmakers really want to see it move forward or not. I guess we'll see if more schools are interested and want to seek the waiver.
I mean, Vinton's principal told me that they already do the transportation. They could definitely do the remediation. Their concern is meeting that that A grade. Do you think that the state would consider, the Department of Education would consider grandfathering them in?
I think they could probably make a good case for a grandfathering, but you know, I looked at recent, and we haven't done our accountability grades in several years, and we've got a new model starting. So this isn't apples to apples, but I think about more than 60% of schools got an A or a B under the previous model. And so, you know, I think adding the B would give a lot more flexibility, but you know, I guess we'll see how the first couple of years go.
The flexibility is one thing that, you know, this dad that I spoke with talked about. They really enjoyed that for their family. I guess a lot of parents at that elementary school really enjoyed the flexibility of having kind of a 3-day weekend.
Yeah, I get that. There are going to be some parents with childcare needs, and that's the big one, right? And so they'll have to find someone else to care for their child on that 5th day. But I think once you get past the initial adjustment, it works. Another thing that schools who have done this around the nation have seen is huge increases in retention and recruitment of teachers. I mean, of any staff. And they're always struggling to fill open positions. And so imagine that if you had to choose between a district where you could work 4 days a week or 5 days a week, you know, which one would you go to?
The principal also said what was down for them was disciplinary reports also came down. And, you know, I asked her, you know, do you think it's just because the kids get a little more rest or their little brains have more time to just kind of process life and all the things that they're learning? And she thought so. She was happy to see the disciplinary reports had gone down.
Yeah, and academics is a question. This is a newer phenomenon, and there are some sort of split studies nationally. But as long as it's not hurting academics, you know, I would think it would be a positive move.
Okay. Sit tight, one more segment with you. Indiana has a new Secretary of Commerce. It's former Republican State Representative Chuck Goodrich. And this past week was his first week on the job. Overseeing the Indiana Economic Development Corporation is a big part of the job. Indiana's new Commerce Secretary is no stranger to business in Indiana. He runs one and will continue as the CEO of Gaylor Electric, one of the country's largest electrical firms. At the same time, in this new role, Goodrich will also head up the Department of Commerce that helps to develop Indiana's workforce and bring jobs and businesses here. Governor Braun said Goodrich was uniquely prepared for his new role because he knows what it's like to sign a paycheck for others. He called Goodrich his partner in economic development. Goodrich said Tuesday wasn't about introducing a new secretary, but about introducing a shared direction and purpose for the state. He said the Office of Commerce and its work should be guided by one question: how do we create more opportunities for every Hoosier?
We're going to measure what matters. Are businesses growing? Are Hoosiers earning more? Is Indiana becoming stronger and more competitive? If the answer is yes, we're going to continue on in that direction. But of course, if the answer is no, we will adjust. That's what businesses do.
Goodrich was asked about how it would work going forward if Gaylor Electric, the company that he is the CEO of, would apply for future tax credits and grants from the IDC, which he oversees as the Commerce Secretary. Goodrich said that there are people in place to make sure there are no issues between the business of the state and the business of Gaylor. He said that there were screenings on both sides, but he didn't really elaborate on how those screenings would work. Are you hearing any criticism of this?
Yeah, and I think it's fair criticism. You know, the best screening process in the world isn't going to stop an employee from feeling, even if no one ever says anything to them, like they need to give this grant to their boss's company. You know, there might be pressure in there. And I do think it's fair for, you know, just regular citizens to be a little disbelieving that these, you know, roles could somehow be separated.
So an optics issue.
I think it is optics, yeah.
What should be first on his agenda now?
I mean, I think they've done a lot on READY and getting the second round of the community funding moving through. You know, and they've reduced the amount of incentives they're giving out compared to previous administrations are trying to focus more on specific, industries, and I guess we'll see the big hit for that on the sort of life sciences, human sciences area. I think they'll do a lot of focusing there.
We've done a lot of reporting on the IEDC offering billions of dollars in tax breaks for data centers. Given how unpopular they are with the public, we've seen that. Do you foresee Goodrich making changes there?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't think he will. And I think another problem is that his company, Gaylor Electric, builds data centers. That's part of what they do. And so that's a little bit else of a bit of conflict that might go against. But the Braun administration has been very supportive of data centers. So, I think he'll stick with what the governor, has said that their policy should be.
But the governor saying if data centers are going to come in, that they need to have a plan about how they're going to pay for things and not push it off on
that
folks.
has been their position, yes.
That has been their position. Niki Kelly, as always, thank you for lending your expertise to us. We really appreciate it. Okay, have a good one. Last month, the Supreme Court pushed back on the president's attempts to end birthright citizenship, but that fight isn't over.
It is a political ploy as we get ready for the November elections.
Coming up, an Indiana lawmaker joins the push to get around the Supreme Court.
No country could be great without fair and honest elections.
And President Trump speaks out in his Thursday night address to the nation. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. A rare primetime address from the White House as President Trump continues to push the need for election security, fueling claims that the 2020 presidential election was interfered with by foreign actors, particularly from China. The president declassifying heavily redacted documents he says prove those claims, but the courts and even members of the president's first administration have long said there was no widespread fraud that would have changed the 2020 election's outcome. NBC's Alice Barr has details on the speech and reaction.
Good evening.
This morning's swift reaction to President Trump's primetime address raising doubts about election security.
No country could be great without fair and honest elections.
The president announced the declassification of intelligence reports now posted online that he said revealed vulnerabilities to possible hacking and foreign interference, repeating his long-held claims about electronic voting systems.
They're vulnerable and they're easily compromised.
Though he did not offer any proof that American machines have been compromised. Democrats argue the president is aiming to undercut the upcoming midterm elections that will determine control of Congress and the future of his agenda.
The president is sowing doubt in an election that he knows he's about to lose.
The president accused China of meddling, pointing to a finding that the Chinese obtained voter registration information for tens of millions of Americans, though those files are readily available to purchase and do not include how people actually voted. He did not offer new information that any foreign governments were able to alter the results of the 2020 election or any other.
Our purpose in disclosing this information is not to weaken confidence in election, but to earn that confidence by confronting vulnerabilities and correcting them very, very quickly.
President Trump also made claims about non-citizens being registered to vote, though that's not the same as casting a ballot, which he did not claim happened in election-altering ways. He urged Congress to pass the Save America Elections Overhaul bill that requires proof of citizenship and voter ID, but that Republicans say does not have enough votes to pass the Senate. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
And the Department of Homeland Security is putting a pause on immigration traffic stops. This after 2 men died in traffic stops with ICE this week. The latest was a man who ran from an ICE traffic stop into a highway in Florida, where he was hit and killed by a semi-truck. That happened just a day after a man was shot and killed by an ICE agent in Maine. The Colombian immigrant who was in the country legally wasn't wanted by ICE. Maine Senator Angus King praised the move to pause ICE traffic stops.
There's no excuse for it. We've known for months that this was something that was necessary.
President Trump, meanwhile, has pushed back on the pause, saying the Department of Homeland Security should resume them. And the United States intensified its strikes against Iran Thursday, hitting targets across the country for a 5th straight day. Iran retaliated by launching missiles and drones at U.S. allies in the region and warned its attacks may escalate. NBC's Keir Simmons reports from Qatar.
Hey there, good day to you. U.S. Central Command announcing that it has launched its 5th night of strikes, another wave of strikes, which again it says is aimed at degrading Iran's capability to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, which is a distance away from here where I am in Doha, Qatar, and there are very few ships passing through that strait right now. Of course, this whole war began over, for example, Iran's nuclear program, but now has descended into a battle over who controls that crucial shipping waterway, that crucial shipping lane. But there are some signs that there could be the door open to negotiation. Iran releasing a dual Iranian-US citizen. That will be seen as potentially an olive branch from Tehran, and the head of Iran's negotiating team saying in a statement just this week that Iranians should not be fearful of war, but they should nor also be fearful of negotiation, said that negotiation is not compromise. The challenge, though, will be how to get back around the table and try to reach an agreement when trust has been broken so many times, and when an agreement that was reached has descended now into this latest round of conflict, with Iran targeting ships in and around the Strait of Hormuz and countries, neighboring countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, where I am. Keir Simmons, NBC News, Doha.
Polls have showed Americans on both sides of the aisle are increasingly skeptical of the nation's alliance with Israel. On Wednesday, more than half of Democrats voted in favor of a Republican amendment in the House that would have stripped more than $3 billion in U.S. aid from Israel. Indianapolis Congressman Andre Carson was one of them. The amendment failed 104 to 314. And President Trump's pick for U.S. Attorney General is struggling to advance to confirmation in the Senate. Todd Blanche faced tough questions from lawmakers on Capitol Hill this week. Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina says he won't support Blanche's nomination unless Blanche meets with accusers of Jeffrey Epstein. We're digging deeper into the debate over birthright citizenship. You'll remember last month the Supreme Court ruled in favor of it, which was a blow to the Trump administration. But conservative leaders say the fight isn't over. One of them is Senator Jim Banks of Indiana. Banks is sponsoring a bill essentially that would end birthright citizenship to people who are born to, quote, foreign invaders. So our Ella Rhodes sat down with legal experts to break down what that means and the impact that comes with it.
On Monday, Indiana U.S. Senator Jim Banks proposed this bill, the Citizenship Act of 2026, to exclude children of invaders from birthright citizenship. Immigration attorney Dalen Likens explains the bill looked for a loophole after the Supreme Court's recent decision to uphold birthright citizenship.
Anyone who we don't want to be in the United States, and we're going to call them an invader, as opposed to an immigrant or someone visiting or a temporary visitor.
The bill defines invaders as any person who has not been lawfully admitted to the U.S. and any person seeking admission to the U.S. under the Immigration and Nationality Act. Likens believes this would lower an immigrant's confidence to seek help.
There are people who are afraid to speak to an attorney or pursue legal avenues that can help them and their family that are existing because they're afraid that they'll get in trouble, or they're afraid that there'll be some really negative consequences to that. And so I think fear is a big part of this.
The last 40 years, Paul Gress has practiced immigration law. He thinks Banks's bill does not have any legal footing.
There's no way you can go about it in legislative terms. It is within the Constitution, all men are created equal, right? And the 14th Amendment made it very, very specific and clear that if you're born here in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen.
He sees the bill as a chess piece for the president's agenda.
It is a political ploy as we get ready for the November election.
Until then, it's up to Congress to decide.
And we reached out to Senator Banks' office for comment, but did not hear back. Civil rights leaders are announcing plans to march on Washington. This is a push to defend voting rights. Leaders say key federal protections against racial discrimination in voting have been weakened. So in response, they're hosting what they call March on Washington 2026 Defend the Vote. That march will take place on August 28th. It marks the 63rd anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington and Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. I'm Emily Longnecker for Niki Kelly, Dustin Grove, and all of us here at 13 News. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you next time.